Matthew, this new data protection legislation coming up, why do we need it?
We've had data protection laws for nearly 20 years now, and when you think back to it, the world in 1998 was a very different place when the Data Protection Act came into force. In those days, only 20% of UK households had a computer, whereas now, of course, we've got multiple devices, and we manage and make use of a lot more data in our daily lives than we did.
In light of Brexit that's coming up, why is the new legislation important?
Well, the European Union has adopted the new General Data Protection Regulation to come into effect in May 2018. And a lot of people might think, well, why do we need to worry about that? Because we're leaving the EU anyway. So there are a couple of good reasons why we need to pay attention to this. Firstly, of course, when the new regulation comes into effect in May 2018, we're still going to be in the EU anyway. So we need to comply with it from that respect. And the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the watchdog in the UK for data protection, tells us that we need to be making preparations for compliance now. The second reason is that even when we leave the EU data protection regulation is still going to be relevant for UK businesses, particularly if businesses are supplying goods or services to individuals within EU states, then the new law will apply to them. And also because the UK will have a vested interest in being viewed as an adequate jurisdiction for data protection regulation in the eyes of the EU institutions, so that data can be freely transferred from EU countries to the UK in order to enable free trade. And so even if we don't have the EU General Data Protection Regulation in its own right from 2018 onwards, we're likely to need something that looks very much like it, even if it isn't the actual thing.
And what will its effect be on large and small businesses?
One of the main effects is that businesses will need to think about what their justification for processing data is. And processing can mean simply holding data about individuals, whether that be customers or suppliers or employees indeed, or job candidates, and also using that data and transferring it to others. So businesses will need to think about what their legal justification is for processing data. That could either be that they have the consent of the individual to using the data and holding it in that way, or it may be other things such as a legitimate interest on their part, or compliance with a legal obligation, or fulfilling a contract that they have with that person. But one way or another, they will need to think about why they are allowed under the law to hold and use that data. They'll also need to provide individuals with what's called a privacy notice, which explains all these things to the individual. And if they're relying on the consent of that individual to hold and use their data, then the criteria for doing that will be much stricter than they are at present. So at the moment, a business can rely on what we call implied consent to hold and use somebody's data. So for instance, the individual has not unsubscribed from an emailing, or they have not unticked a pre-ticked box. So their inaction in that regard is viewed as consent. That's no longer going to be allowable under the new law. You will have to get explicit consent and clear and unambiguous consent from individuals to holding and using their data in that way. So businesses need to look at their policies, their procedures around the issues of data protection, and they'll need to look at, again, what their justification is for holding that data and record that in policies.
And Matthew, what should companies do if they need more information?
We've prepared a briefing note about all these issues, which is going to be on our website. And so if businesses are interested in finding out more, they can look at us, and they're very welcome to contact us, and we'd be delighted to help them with looking at what policies and procedures they need to put in place and how they're going to address the issues that this new law raises.